Ladies and gentlemen, it's Love My Tool TV again. Tony Fortunato is our guest MC. I think we're going to make him permanent. We kind of like him. And we got some great guests today from an enormous, wonderful company called Ixia. Tony, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. So today's going to be an interesting kind of show. As with the last show with Mike Canny, today's the first time we've actually, Keith and I have met. And we've emailed over the years, but we've never actually met. So these are great excuses for me to finally meet people who I've been conversing with over the years. Of course, Recep's on the phone. You know what? I've been butchering his name all morning, so I'm hoping I get it close. Right? You'll correct me again.
That was very good, Tony. That was very good.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about visibility. We're going to be talking about some cool little concepts. I don't want to steal Keith's thunder, so I'm going to kick it off to him. We'll have a little dialogue about packet capture and performance, and I'm sure tips and tricks will come out of it as well. So Keith, go for it.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so hopefully you've heard of Ixia before. If you haven't, we've been known for the test equipment that we make and so forth, but we make a fantastic line of visibility products. So that includes taps and packet brokers. So hopefully everybody's familiar with what visibility is and monitoring. If you're not, basically, I know most of you are familiar with monitoring tools like Wireshark, and I'm sure you're familiar with security tools like IPSs, firewalls, and then, of course, out-of-band products like SIMs and IDS and so forth, along with different application performance monitoring, network performancing tools. Well, Ixia makes the plumbing that goes in between the core switches in your network and those tools. So like I said, we do taps, and we do inline taps, out-of-band taps. So we make basically bypass switches that you can use inline to improve the reliability of the connections to your security tools. And then with the packet brokers, that gives you the ability to go in and do filtering, load balancing, de-duplication, all of these other capabilities that I'm sure you guys have been used to. If not, then check it out. Again, you can go to www.ixiacom.com, and you can see about packet brokers and taps and bypass switches that we make and so forth. So just want to make sure everybody knew about that. And then also we were going to talk about visibility, the importance of it today, and especially lossless visibility. Recep, I don't know if you want to chime in on anything.
Sure, absolutely. So, let's talk about what exactly is visibility, because sometimes it's, some people use the word monitoring for it, but it's actually much more than monitoring, right? Visibility is really it's about eliminating blind spots, improving network security, reliability, eliminating problems, and optimizing the network performance. So, and this is where the source of the data is important, right? What do you look at? Traditional, I would say maybe server admins or network admins might look at log files. Log files are great. It's one piece of information, but it's not the only piece of information. In fact, I would say it probably ranks low in terms of getting the most useful information, right? So that's why it's much more interesting to look at live data. Now, and the way to access live data is, of course, through typically with taps. I mean, that's where you actually get the original data. Span ports, yes, that is an option. And span ports actually do work, especially if you have low bandwidth utilization. Because if you think about it, what you're really doing is you're using one of the ports of a switch that is doing normal operation, right? Doing normal switching. It has to first and foremost do normal switching. Then, on a best effort case, it might actually copy some of those frames on the span ports for you to have a look at it. Well, that's great. It's just that when the bandwidth utilization of your network goes up, that's exactly when you need visibility more, because that's when things can go south very easily, right? Typically, when there's not that much activity, application performance is great. It's much more easier to figure out whether there's security issues. It's really when, if you're having a DDoS attack, your bandwidth goes up. Well, how are you going to use a span port? Because your switch can barely do the regular switching, right? So that's why taps are essentially fundamental in getting us untainted, direct, exact copy of the data. So that's one part of it, right? And it's essentially the concept of tapping everything, right? Because you don't know exactly, you can't really just look at part of the network, because the data flows everywhere. And if if you think about it, in today's networks, we're having applications come up at any part of the network. So there's a lot of east-west traffic. It's not just north-south traffic. This means that you really need to tap everything. Well, that's a lot of data. So on one hand, you want to tap a lot of data because you need to access it, but now you have a ton of data, and then how do you look at that? Because typically the security tools, the application monitoring tools, other analytics tools are limited in capacity. And if you tap everything, you might have orders of magnitude more data than your tools can handle. So the question is then, how can we get the right piece of information to the right tool? How can we groom that traffic without actually dropping it, right? So there's a big difference between grooming it, getting the important information, getting the actionable intelligence, versus dropping it. And there's a big difference. So I'll come back to that, Keith, but I don't want to take too much of the time. So if you want to continue.
Yeah, no, I'm not. That's exactly what we want to talk about today, because you want to get all of the information. You want to collect it all. You can't feed it all to the tools. So you're going to go in and you're going to do filtering, but you want to control the information that goes to the tools. You don't want the packet broker or some other device just intermittently dropping packets, dropping data. You want to be able to control what the tools are going to see and what they don't see. Right. And so it's very important, because some of the packet brokers out there, they do have some issues. In fact, there's actually an analysis that we've done with the Tolly Group that went in and analyzed it.
That's a very interesting point that you bring up. So typically what a network packet broker is that it sits between your fabric of taps and bypass switches and between your tools, right? So you need some kind of platform infrastructure there to, once you have all that traffic, to filter it, understand and figure out which information is relevant and which one is not, filter it, groom it, and then send it to all these tools. But as I mentioned, there's a big difference between filtering and intelligent grooming versus dropping. So these network packet brokers look like switches, but they don't act like switches, right? We exactly tell them which parts of the packet to inspect, whether it's just a layer 2 all the way going up to layer 7. Again, some packet brokers just can look at the first parts of the frame, so they're limited to lower layers, layer 2, layer 3. Some can actually understand, oh, that's Netflix traffic. Oh, that's Facebook traffic. So you can do much more intelligent filtering there. The challenge, though, is that as you start looking at these frames, and as the frame sizes get smaller, maybe down to 256, 128, and 64, these devices, some of them cannot handle it. Interestingly, we had one customer who was doing a POC with our device and another device. What they're realizing is that our device was spitting out more traffic. The other one was not. So what they realized that the competitor's device was actually dropping packets, but it was not reporting that it was dropping packets. Based on that, we got together with the Tolly Group and did this report where they did third-party, unbiased testing to figure out what was going on. And indeed, not all network packet brokers are equal. There are a number of ways to design them, and you can do more intelligent things, such as using dedicated ASICs, dedicated FPGAs, and dedicated program processors, intelligent software, where you actually can inspect every single packet at every single size, send it to the right tool without dropping any one of them. Our competitor, I think, in this particular case was Gigamon, and they were dropping frames left and right. In fact, I think that I have the report here, for 64-bit frames, they were dropping 72.6% of the frames, and slightly for higher frames, like 128 bits, they were dropping 53%. Now you might say, well, my average is higher. But here's the trick, actually. The whole average is very tricky, because typically you have a lot of small packets on one side, and then you have a lot of large packets on the other side. Yes, when you take the average, it may seem like it's somewhere in the middle, but it really isn't. It's really just tends to be binned differently. So that's great. You can handle the large packets, but what happens on the small packets? What happens all the sessions, right? There's something called session affinity. Many of the tools that we attach for network monitoring, they follow sessions. They need to understand when does a TCP/IP session starts, when does it end. And if they miss those small packets, which are typically for initiation and termination, they don't understand anything in between. So it's actually a much bigger problem than just dropping packets, right? Keith, you want to?
Yeah, because then
when they first started building packet brokers, all they did was take a Broadcom switch.
That's right.
And turned it into a soft device. And when Anui which is now Ixia,
Mm-hmm.
built theirs. Chip Webb put everything in firmware.
That's right.
And with the real GUI, not an interpreter. Now, some people have come up with a interpreter that writes line code in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, line code by itself is very inefficient. We see that with almost any switch out there. And one thing I was going to mention, though, is I've done a lot of studies. Tony's done some with me, too, and so has another guy named Chris Greer. We've taken span ports. And even if there's nothing on any of the other ports except the one that you're pulling off of the span port tap out, the timing is way off.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And it will automatically drop packets.
Yep.
It will drop long frames, short frames, and of course bad frames. And sometimes knowing about bad frames is important.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. So true.
And so if you're going to do, like today, we do a lot of security events, we do a lot of e-discovery events. I find it very difficult, and I have had to go to court before on things, and I will not say, hey, I captured that and I know it's all there, because all I had access to was a span port. I can't do that. That is lying.
That's right.
And so now some people know that, but we're still having difficulty getting people to understand that you need access to everything in as close to real time as possible.
That's right.
And with a lot of the technology you have, it's real time or relative time, I call it, because every time you touch something, you change its timing dimensions in the universe. But the neat thing about the Ixia product is that it keeps that timing consistent.
That's right. That's right.
Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say my biggest concern that I run into on the road when I'm doing consulting engagements and troubleshooting with customers, we talk about drop packets. And the biggest question, this is a really kind of a catch-22 kind of question. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. How do people even know if their tool, their span port, their whatever they're using, if they're dropping packets? Because the only time we've ever been able to figure it out is when you put it side by side with another device, or we try to push traffic through it, control traffic through it. But day to day, like, how would the average person know if their tool of choice is even dropping packets? Like, what do you think?
So I'll start and hand off to Keith. That is a great. So dropping packets is unacceptable, and typically nobody wants to highlight that in our product. You typically, nobody says, "Oh, great, let's put on our GUI a counter here just shows how many drop packets we have dropped." That would be great. Nobody wants to do that, right? And unfortunately, it is in these cases where the symptom is something else, right? And as part of debugging that, they'll start playing with the knobs, turning off certain features, and then realize, you know what, my switch or my packet broker is indeed dropping packets. But typically, it's unless you do an apples-to-apples comparison where you say, I'm going to have two devices, I'm going to send the traffic, I'm going to inspect it on the other end, and I'm going to compare, it's very difficult to realize that you're actually dropping packets. And that's why for a lot of our customers, we actually encourage them to do a POC, just because, if you're going to spend all that money for network monitoring, for network performance and for security, which is the fundamentals of what enables the business run uninterrupted, why would you not take the time to do a POC, right? It's the most fundamental thing. It's, even when you drive, but before buying a car, you'll typically take it for a test drive, and you might actually go and shop to a couple of dealers, say, I'm going to try that car, I'm going to try that car, and then you realize that something that looks great on paper doesn't really drive that well. We do that for a car. Why would you not do it for a multi-million-dollar monitoring infrastructure that you're going to deploy and going to use for the rest of, for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah,
that's exactly. It's like Tolly.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just to chime in as well, so to get back to your question, Tony, yeah, we've had customers who don't know that they're dropping packets. And then they sort of have a problem and they're trying to figure it out. And it's like, well, they were doing troubleshooting based upon the information they thought maybe the network was dropping packets, and they did all this and they changed bandwidth, they did other things, nothing worked. And then they were finally coming back to, well, maybe it's the monitoring equipment. But it takes you a lot of time, a lot of effort to get there. So like Recep was just saying, the easiest way is to hook up a traffic generator to it and just test your system out. Yeah. We've had customers like the one he mentioned, but there's been a couple others. They actually went and did that, and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? We are actually dropping traffic. And there was nothing in the desktop interface or the the GUI interface that they had, or the command line interface, telling them they were dropping the packets. So you really got to go in, you got to test it, see what it does, and just and test it more than just a bare minimum rate. If the system can go up to 40 gig, test it to 20, 25, 30 gig at least. Don't test it at 5 or 10 gig, because you're not going to get enough traffic to really start pushing the system to see.
Yeah,
pushing the system like 60% or more, boom, things came out.
Yeah, this is very interesting, because a lot of times you'll see claims such as, this is a 40 gig port, it can support 40 gigs of bandwidth and whatnot. But as soon as you turn on certain features, whether it's filtering or de-duplication is very important, right? Because we just said we're tapping everywhere. Well, you might see one frame or one application from a session go through a number of taps. So you're getting all that information duplicate, and you want to remove the duplicates and send the unique ones. So as soon as you turn on, for example, de-duplication, you'll see that the switch or the NPB is no longer supporting that bandwidth. And that's because many of our competitors will use a general purpose CPU and run software on it. So that's great, but I'm sure that anybody who's used a laptop, as soon as you start running applications and have, like me, I have 30 tabs open on Chrome, I have all these applications running, then things start to slow down because it's a general purpose processor, right? And because of that, whatever you're seeing on your servers, on your laptops, it's the exact same thing. The fundamentals of physics do not really change. We do things differently. And we use an FPGA. I think, Tony, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, this is all great. And I wanted to throw in just a little nugget that I look for on the road when we talk about drop packets. I asked the customer just to get one conversation. And when I see a lot of retransmissions or lost packets on a regular conversation that's obviously working, then the questions arise. People say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, how can you be dropping the packets if it's working? And look at the high retransmission rate, and it's working fine. And this is stuff they've been tried and trued and tested and believed in for years. And then when you finally ask them to pay attention to something specific that doesn't add up,
that's right,
then things start to happen, right?
That's right.
So
that's
yeah, and like another thing that happens is they may be getting a false security indications, that pop up and say something's happening, or they may be missing some security threats. So,
right.
And they don't know about that until they just pop up. Like I think the Ponemon Institute in their last study was going through, and they basically came up with the fact that I think it was there was a long anyway, I won't quote a number off the top of my head, but there was a long delay within people finding out that there was a breach that had happened. And so they were like, wait, how did I miss that? And in fact, they had to be told by law enforcement or a customer or a partner or somebody that there had been a breach that customer didn't even know themselves. They had missed the data. They'd missed the indication.
Yeah,
that was that toy company last year that lost 3.5 million pictures of children and their mom and dad and all that stuff. That was one of many, and it happens all the time where not even that long ago, my wife's credit card was breached.
That's right.
And
that's right. Yeah.
she could go back and point to which company it was at. So after we did a little research, that company had a data leak for going on probably 3 years. They just didn't know it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's the majority. By the way, there's one thing I do want to mention. I love the fact that you can do de-duplication, packet recognition, and filtering. But I always tell people, don't jump to doing that. First off, find out if you do have real duplicate packets or different, overlaid route paths and that. But so many people today say, oh, I just want to get rid of the duplicate packets in my analysis. And that's great. But think a little bit about what you're doing, because you may be hiding another problem you don't.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Know about it.
Yeah.
So,
interesting. And the packets don't really start dropping just with deduplication. You also have this SSL decryption, right? Many packet trimming, changing of the VLAN tags or other areas, because a network packet broker, of course, is much more than a switch. That's why you can't really just take a Broadcom switch silicon and then add all these features. Broadcom switch silicon was made for a standard switch, and it's never really meant to do all these advanced functions. So when you just rely on that, or just rely on a server, you just don't get the performance. SSL decryption is one of those big ones, because everything is becoming SSL encrypted. So you have to decrypt it for your tools. That is just contributing to the also packet loss. What is packet loss? Packet loss, it doesn't just mean that, I'm losing visibility, so I'm not going to fully be able to understand what the application performance issue is. Is that it's really security, right? Because hackers are getting more and more intelligent, clever, extremely very good schemes all the time. Which one is worse? Knowing that you were hacked or not knowing that you were hacked for 3 years, right? And that just continues to go on and on. We hear about these things. A couple of years ago it was Target. Just recently was Yahoo. And these are just the ones that are being exposed, right? There's a ton of them. This is the tip of the iceberg. There's a ton of them, smaller corporations, right? They don't know it. They don't want to disclose it, but the leak still happens. And what is the economic impact of that to the business, right? Apart from just reputation, it's millions of dollars. So it is, in fact, important to invest in your infrastructure so you can avoid these things as much as possible.
Yeah, because one of the key things is the security and monitoring tools are only as good as the data they see or don't see.
Yeah.
They had that hack last year, which they stole $100 billion from banks all over the world. And it was a leak that went on for years, actually a year and a half. And if someone had even done a very basic study about just what was their TCP IP address field, and put timing to that, they would have easily recognized. It's funny, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're getting hit with all this data from a barren IP address we never heard of before. And the great thing about a packet broker to me and getting real data is that you can go through and benchmark. Now, Tony and I talk about this all the time. You can get real benchmark information. So when you go back, it's like when you go to the doctors, right? They know what your temperature should be, what your blood pressure should be, how your eyes react, how ugly you are, things like that, okay? And that's a norm. That's the benchmark. And people treat networks kind of irregular in that respect. Benchmarking is so important.
Yeah.
And with a packet broker, I can narrow down to just nice little slits what I want to see and what's important to me and my applications.
Hey Tim, I got a question from a viewer, and the question is: you keep talking about packet brokers and taps. What is the difference? So Keith, anybody want to jump in and get that one?
Yeah,
Sure.
so basically the tap is the access device. That's literally like you put a device in there that will make a copy of all the packets running by. So the packets keep traversing the network. You're just making a copy, basically using optics to reflect light with the different packets and then send them on to your tools. So as Recep mentioned earlier, you could do that either through a tap or a span port. The span port, of course, is connected to the switch. We talked about it earlier. It's got some issues with it. The tap doesn't. It makes a complete copy of all the packets, good or bad. And you can put multiple taps in the network. You can put them all through the network. You can put them in the core, at the edge, and so forth. So it gives you the ability to go in on different segments and pull off a copy of all the data. The packet broker then takes and aggregates all the different flows to it. So it's the aggregation device. It sees, you can connect all of the taps and even spans as well to it. Then the packet broker can filter and segment and then send that information where it needs to go to all of the various tools that you have connected to it. And you can even do load balancing, the deduplication we talked about. You can do time stamping,
SSL decryption.
Yeah,
and you can filter based on various frame header information. It can be IP source, destination source, MAC addresses, VLAN. But then if you have more intelligence built into the network packet broker, then you can just say, you know what, I have Netflix traffic as well as Facebook traffic, but then I also have my financial departments traffic. I only want to inspect the financial departments traffic, and I don't want to look at Netflix. You don't need to actually be an expert here. You can the application will just detect all the traffic coming in and say, all of this is Netflix. You know what? It's a video. I don't care. Let it drop. I don't need to bombard my, expensive security tool with all the Netflix traffic. Let's just send the actual data that I think that might be hacked or could be possibly be hacked, or there might be some malicious code, and send that, right? So it's not just looking at the lower layers of the information model, or looking at the first few bytes of the frame header, but it can actually do deep inspection and match on these signatures. And by the way, these application signatures change all the time. So the tool is intelligent enough to look at all the bits, say that this is a Netflix, but some of these models that we have, you can actually have a subscription so that as new applications are added, the network packet broker will automatically download those applications and learn new applications. Like, you go on Go released, our application center added that to our signature. So you can actually see when you're in your network packet broker, oh, you know what? Somebody from Russia is playing Gigamon Go. That's okay. No need to send that to my tool, but it can be something else too. And by the way, these signatures change all the time, so it's not constant. So that's why it really depends on the level of intelligence that you want and sophistication that you want. It can be very simple to very, very sophisticated and useful.
Now,
one comment that
I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead.
I was going to make one comment. Earlier, we talked about the breaches, march on. According to the IC3 group, I just got a report, 2016 reports are 24.9% so far this year over last year. And as you adequately pointed out, those are the ones that are being reported.
Yeah.
And I think we're only seeing, according to a lot of the reporting groups, that we're probably only actually getting reports of less than 50%.
Yeah.
Of data leaks and breaches.
Yeah, and it just gets worse because especially the surface attack increases with being your own devices and everybody's becoming more mobile, working from home, Internet of Things, virtualization, right? And we'll have to say that for another day, but what happens when you have 50 virtual machines running on a server and they don't even go to the top rack switch where you can't even need a tap? What happens there? How do you get that information? How do you inspect that? And so on and so forth. So it's much more dire than it's been disclosed. Yeah.
It's essential to build something right up front. Don't build this huge network and then forget to have,
That's
you
right.
buy an expensive car and it doesn't even have a gas indicator on it, so you know what's in your gas tank. Come on.
Yeah,
man.
exactly.
The same gentleman asked in the final part of the question, was a two-parter. The second part of the question was, he knows it's not reasonable or realistic, but is there a ballpark figure for an entry-level packet broker?
Sorry, are they asking price?
Yeah, price range, just for a quote-unquote entry-level packet broker, if such a thing even exists. We all know they're like cars. They all come configured differently, but I guess he just wants a ballpark.
Sure. So I would say, well, what do I have to do to sell you a packet broker right now? Tell me. Let me just talk to my manager. I would say you can probably find one for, again, very basic configuration, probably $15,000.
All right. That's probably what he's looking for. He just probably wants to find out what
Yeah. It starts with, depends on the port configuration and how many ports it supports, how much bandwidth, as well as the features. You can go down to $15,000, and then it can go to $1 million, right?
Yeah,
Depending on size.
You can easily spend. Typically, what I tell people is estimate 10% of your investment of your network.
That's right. That's right.
And start off. If you can't buy a packet broker, at least get tapped so you can filter, because a lot of the devices that we look at networks with have built-in filtering.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the fundamentals. At least tap everything so that you have that information coming in, right? Just do the fundamentals. Start with those.
Right.
Cool.
Well, and then also, like Recep said, just contact us here at Ixia, and we'll talk to you. We'll work a deal.
That's right.
That's exactly what I wrote back to him. I said, I'm sure the folks will be more than happy to talk to you. So we're actually, by the way, that flew pretty quick, guys. We're 30 minutes in. I don't want to keep people too long. So I'm just going to thank everybody for watching. Thanks, Recep. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for watching. Thanks for giving us a bit of your time. And we'll catch you guys at the next show.
I do have one more thing to say, Tony. For the Tolly report, go to our website, www.ixia.com, and just check it out. It's there for you. There's also a white paper on the importance of lossless network visibility. So we got free resources. Check them out.
And we got them on the. And by the way, I'll mention that Keith has been very prolific this year in putting articles up, or actually sending to me to put up. And so we're building this huge amount of data flow and information base. So like a friend of mine used to say, before you understand what cowabunga is, understand what it means before you say it. So go out, got great information out there. And also one thing that I personally want to say is I've known Keith a long time, and I know a lot of the people in Ixia. And one thing they're very good at is answering questions. And I've always felt they answer it very honestly. You know, no, everybody wants a customer that comes back to them, and the first time you're dishonest with them is the last time you do business with them. And the people at Ixia, I feel. And of course, if you don't believe them, call Tony and I, and we're committed to telling the truth. We do it every day, so we'll help you out.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right, guys.
Yep, appreciate it.
Great to meet everybody. Have a blessed day, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.